This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with corporate board member. And once again, it is time for the Washington update for board members. And back joining us to give us that excellent update is Clarke Camper, who's the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the NYSE Euronext. Welcome, Clarke.
Hi, TK. Good to be here.
Well, you're familiar with this. You know the drill. So now we have a great topic to start with. That's the election. So let's start. You know, we're trying to sort of tweak this towards the board. So let's start with the election fever down in Washington. Tell us what directors should be thinking about.
Sure, TK. Yeah, everywhere I go, as you can imagine, I get asked about the election. And I guess there are a couple things I'd say. First is I get the sense in talking with business leaders that many people think that the election's over, frankly, that the president is going to be reelected. And I want to be clear about this. I'm not making a political point. I'm making an analytical one. I actually think the race is still anybody's to win, or it could be, in the president's case, maybe his to lose. But the race, I believe it's going to tighten up. I think if you look analytically at the polls, for instance, if you look at the number of voters who could still be persuaded to change their votes, if you look at the number of likely voters, if you look at the polls just in swing states, all those things are important metrics to overlay on this kind of drumbeat that you hear in the media about the president's juggernaut. And many of those things that I just described would actually lead you to think the race is going to be quite close. So I would continue to watch this space. The last thing I'd say about that is I do think after the first debate, which is coming up shortly after we're filming this, I do think give it about a week or so, and if the polls start to really settle out about where they are now with the president with a relatively strong lead, I would begin to believe that probably is the way the election goes. But again, until then, I have cautioned folks to realize that this election is far from over. The second thing I wanted to mention is that really in terms of trying to get things done in Washington, the real body to look at is the United States Senate. And as I think many board members know, it takes 60 votes in the U.S. Senate really to get anything done. So there's really a 60-vote bottleneck. That is unlikely to change in this election under any scenario. Neither party, whoever ends up controlling, is likely to have 60 votes. So functionally, the Senate is going to continue to be a difficult sort of barrier to action, regardless of who's elected president. So again, look at those two things. Look carefully at the polls, look carefully at what's going on in the Senate, and then you'll have a more astute read, I think, of the landscape.
Clarke, I couldn't think of anything more depressing than you telling us that it's going to be much of the same, because I think that's one of the big frustrations certainly to companies, certainly to board members, and their not only in their business but their personal. It just seems like decisions don't come out anymore. It just is very frustrating. Agreed.
Yeah, I'd say I've been in Washington for a little more than 20 years. And again, not as a political comment, but as a personal comment, really as an American. I'm as disappointed and discouraged as I ever have been in my career in terms of Washington's ability to grapple with the big issues. That said, I do think, and I guess maybe we can get to these a little bit later, but I do think there is a bigger role right now for the business community to stand up and try to help break the gridlock, because clearly the two sides, the sort of Democrats and Republicans, are engaged in a kind of partisan gridlock, trench warfare. And the thing that one important piece that can help knock us out of that place is, again, business community voices standing up and saying it's time for change.
Yeah, well, when you say gridlock, that's a great segue into my next question, which is all the tax legislation and as they call it, the Fiscal Cliff.
Right.
So that just heads the parade as far as frustration goes. So give us an update on that. Right. What do you see happening on that end?
Yeah. So in terms of the fiscal cliff, that is the phrase that Ben Bernanke coined to describe the combination of tax increases and spending cuts that will occur on January 1 of 2013 if Congress doesn't act. And I assume most board members know that, but just to make sure. Right. The real question is, big picture, is Congress going to act to avert the fiscal cliff? And I personally believe that they will. I think, as I've said previously, this is an extremely partisan Congress, but members are not crazy. And I do think that the combination of the fiscal cliff, which by some accounts is as high as a $600 billion hit in 2013 alone to the U.S. economy, I do believe members one way or another are going to come together to address that. Now, in the short run, I think what we'll see is right after the election, Congress is going to come back for a lame duck session. And the question there is, in terms of averting a fiscal cliff, do they actually kick the can down the road, which personally is what I think is going to happen, that one way or another members of Congress are going to avert the cliff, give themselves, say, maybe 6 months to try to come to much more of a grand bargain and address the big picture deficit problems? Or will Congress actually sail off over that fiscal cliff, creating enough kind of pressure, political pressure on themselves, that when the new Congress and a new administration shows up, and I mean that by whether it's a second Obama administration or a new Romney administration, when they all show up, then the idea is if they actually sailed off over the cliff, there'd be additional pressure on them to actually do something. Again, I think the optimistic side is I believe one way or another Congress and the president will act. My personal feeling, again, to be more specific, is that I think that they probably will act to kick the can down the road and not let us go off that cliff. But there are many serious voices who say that we will go off that cliff, and I want board members to understand that from my perspective, that's not something that we would prefer, but don't forget the big picture, which is I do think that would be a temporary condition.
Wow, talk about a big issue.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's not the only one. What else are you seeing
Sure.
in Washington that are key issues for
Right.
board members?
Right, yeah, in particular for board members, there are a couple areas that come to mind. One is tax issues. So again, it's part of, as I described, the fiscal cliff. There's going to be tax reform one way or another, and there are two issues that NYSE Euronext has been very active on, and that I believe many board members could be very effective in lending their voices to. One is treatment of capital gains, and the other is treatment of dividend income. And at the end of the year, the treatment of both those items is scheduled to increase. In other words, the tax rates are scheduled to increase in the case of dividend income to go up to ordinary income rates. Now, what's been floated, and I was encouraged that Senate Democrats in particular seem to have agreed that they might actually come to a 20% tax rate on both cap gains and dividends. But that was a proposal that was floated late this last summer. I think that's probably about as good an outcome as we're going to find. Again, the business community, though, needs to add its voice to the debate to say, help make the case for why that would be important, and conversely, why it would be so chilling to allow the tax rates to go up to ordinary income, for instance. So that's one group of items. The second is, going back to the fiscal cliff, that there is an organization that's been started called Fix the Debt, and it's a CEO-driven organization. So you have members of the Fortune 500 CEOs. I don't know how many there are at this point, but it's a good number. It's 50, 60, 70 at last count that I saw, who've joined together, again, as a business community to lend their voices to say, one way or another, we have got to address our debt problem, our fiscal problems. So one thing that board members can do is encourage their CEOs to, if not get involved specifically with that organization, to begin speaking out on this issue. As I say, I think here's one where the business community is going to have a lot of SWAT.
You've made several references to one voice.
Mm-hmm.
So what should board members be doing? Okay,
Yeah.
Here we are in this position. We need to have influence. Give me your opinion about what they can do today to help out in all this stalemate.
Yeah, I think, TK, probably the single most important thing that board members can do is to speak with a collective voice. Now, the way that you speak collectively is less important than the fact that you do speak collectively, but it could be a group of, or all board members from a particular company could be speaking on behalf of any of the issues I mentioned, or others that are of importance to you or to the company. You could speak collectively with one voice through, for instance, NYSE Euronext. We're happy if anyone watching the video would like to talk with me about ways that they could assist us in our efforts. So again, the point is really less about what the vehicle is, but more about trying to speak collectively and amplify your voice such that you really will be heard more strongly in Washington.
Well, hopefully these issues, as you said, people won't sit on them, because
Right.
even if they haven't collectively joined together, responding or giving some response to these issues is important.
It is critical.
I know here's two people that are frustrated, and hopefully we'll either through PACs or through whatever, make our words heard.
Yes.
But as always, it's a pleasure to have you here updating the group. We're going to have you back after the election so that we can get an update on what's going on. But thanks again for joining us.
Great. My pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. Join us next week. We'll have another interesting topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.